Welcome to the Pasho Perspective, a place where I share my perspective on everything in the space between life and death. I am your host, Pasho. Well, my Pachos Chachos, first of all, let me say happy Valentine's Day to you all. I hope that you are blessed enough to have a significant other to share this day with, and if you don't, I hope that you get to find one someday, sooner than later, so that you can join the team and celebrate joy with us. But back to Romeo and Juliet. So at the end of Act 1, Scene 1, if you will recall, the boys, Benvolio and Romeo, are going to continue talking, right? Having their conversation about Benvolio convincing his cousin that there's plenty of fish in the sea, and Romeo defending his love for Rosaline, that he deems is the most beautiful girl, right? And so Benvolio kind of takes that challenge and says, okay, we'll see what happens. So scene 2 now, we are in a street near the Capulet house, which, remember, the Capulets are Juliet, and enter Capulet, Lord Capulet, and Paris. Paris is a kinsman of the prince and a servant. And so they're having a conversation, and, again, you gotta love the way Shakespeare tells a story. He just thrusts us into mid-conversation. You can already tell that these two have been talking about whatever it was the prince wanted to say to Lord Capulet, to which then Lord Montague was going to be going and, pleading his side too of what happened. And so Capulet starts off mid-conversation, but Montague is bound as well as I, in penalty alike, and 'tis not hard, I think, for men so old as we to keep the peace. Right? And so even Lord Capulet here, again, because of age and maturity, and wisdom, realizes this is silly. This really shouldn't be that difficult for us not to fight. We're old, and death now is the penalty for us both. So anyone involved in the fight is going to be punished. And so, he kind of admits that 'tis not hard, I think, right? It's not difficult. It shouldn't be difficult to do as the prince wants. And so Paris, being a nephew of the prince, going, as always, wanting to defend his uncle, I guess it would be, right? Says, of honorable reckoning are you both, and pity 'tis you lived at odds so long. And so he's basically saying, you're both honorable, you're both great families, and it's a shame. It's a shame that this fight has been irreconcilable. But now, my lord, what say you to my suit? And so if you pay attention to the wording, you can tell here that Paris has been wanting to marry Juliet for some time, because the way Capulet answers, but saying over what I have said before, right? So this isn't the first time we've had this conversation, right? And what is Paris's suit? Well, he wants to marry Juliet. And so he's like, yeah. Of course, I'll walk you to your house. We can talk about whatever the prince said, my uncle. But to the serious point, can I marry your daughter, please? And so Capulet responds, but saying over what I have said before, my child is yet a stranger in the world. She hath not seen the change of 14 years. Let 2 more summers wither in their pride, ere we may think her ripe to be a bride. In other words, she's 13 and hasn't had enough experience in life. She's still a child. Let her mature a little bit. Let her, build memories while she's still innocent and free. And so he does come to a compromise and says, if you will wait 2 summers, right? If you wait 2 more years, then I think she'll be old enough, and she'll have gained enough memories and wisdom and experience to then be ready to be made a wife. And so Paris, not to be deterred, wants to convince his possible future father-in-law that, younger than she are happy mother's maid. trying to convince him that, hey, I mean, there's 12-year-olds who are already popping out babies. I mean, your girl's 13, that's older. I mean, why not start it now? But you can tell Capulet is having none of it. And too soon marred are those so early made. The earth hath swallowed up all my hopes but she. She is the hopeful lady of my earth. But woo her, gentle Paris, get her heart. My will to consent is but a part. And she agree within her scope of choice, lies my consent, and fair according voice. So a lot of stuff in there. So we learn that the earth hath swallowed up all his hopes, but Juliet. So in other words, their children, for no reason known to us, have not made it. So he's had other children, maybe because of pestilence. I mean, obviously it's not because of poverty. Perhaps what the mother-to-be is eating and drinking, you got to take those things into consideration. I doubt they knew as much as, we know now about what is healthy and unhealthy for a baby in the womb. But he admits, Juliet is my only one. This is daddy's girl. And so I don't want to make an example of her to where the rest of her life is ruined. She's young, and I want her to be happy. And so when you get to the part where he says, but woo her, gentle Paris, he does kind of offer up another way, because again, right now, as it stands, you're waiting 2 more years. But woo her, gentle Paris, and get her heart, and then you have my consent. If you can get her to tug at my arm and say, Daddy, I love him, I want to marry him, then I'm not going to stop you. You don't have to wait 2 years. But unless she does that, then as the deal lies, you're going to wait 2 years. However, as I believe all fathers wanting to protect the maidenheads of their daughters, let's say, and in no rush to be replaced as her favorite male figure in her life, he offers another choice, which I think you can parallel a lot with what Benvolio said in scene 1, where he says, this night I hold an old unaccustomed feast, whereto I have invited many a guest, such as I love, and you among the store, one more most welcome makes my number more. So in other words, we're throwing a party tonight, and if you can add to that guest list, that would make me very happy. And then the humility comes. At my poor house, which, will hold about 100 people and have servants all over the place and cooks and chefs and minstrels and all that too. But, at my poor house, look to behold this night, earth treading stars that make dark heaven light. Until I read Shakespeare, I thought maybe I was the only one who put beautiful women, not even beautiful women, all women are beautiful, when you put them on a pedestal, and apparently Shakespeare thought the world of them too, calling them earth-treading stars. Such comforts as do lusty young men feel of limping winter treads, when well-apparelled April on the heel, even such delights among fresh female buds shall you this night inherit at my house. So in other words, it's April now, and April means spring, and spring means warmer weather. And when limping winter treads, it means that now winter's season has gone by, and instead of wearing sweaters and sweatpants and Gore-Tex jackets and stuff like that, obviously I'm kidding, they don't have that much stuff, but they had to put much thicker apparel on to remain warm, where he's telling Paris now that it's April, the sweater and the jacket and everything comes off. And so you get to see these beautiful, fresh female buds, right? These young women in my home. And so he instructs them, hear all see, and like her most whose merit most shall be, which, on more view of many, mine being one, may stand in number, though in reckoning none. Come, go with me. And before we get to him talking to a servant, let's rewind and review then the instructions. And so, like Benvolio, he wants them to, compare Juliet with other girls. Make sure she is the one that you want. I don't want you marrying my daughter and then being unfaithful to her because you had regrets. Like, see what's out there. Make sure my girl is the one that you want. And if she is, then, as we have agreed, either woo her to where she's begging me to marry you, or wait 2 years and I will give her to you, as is his right, as the father in those times in the 14th century in Italy. And so he says, come go with me, right? And there's a servant there, and he hands him a piece of paper, and he says, go, Sirrah, trudge about through fair Verona. Find those persons out whose names are written there, and to them say, my house and welcome on their pleasure stay. All right, and so they walk off the stage. And so in other words, he's telling the servant, this is the guest list. Go tell those people they are invited to my party, and I expect them to be there. And so the servant now is left alone in a soliloquy, right? One person left alone on stage, and he's in a little bit of a pickle. He says, find them out whose names are written here. It is written that the shoemaker should meddle with his yard, and that the tailor with his last, the fisher with his pencil, and the painter with his nets. But I am sent to find those persons whose names are here writ, and can never find what names the writing person hath here writ. I must do the learned in good time. And so the servant reveals to all of us that he doesn't know how to read. And so the guest list is just a bunch of gibberish. And he even proves his ignorance by mixing up the different tools that people use, like a painter with nets and a fisher with pencils. And just as luck would have it, some might call it destiny, enter Benvolio and Romeo. And they, again, too, are in the middle of that same conversation, talking about finding other beauties and Romeo defending his love. And so Benvolio says, tut, man, one fire burns out, another's burning, right? If you get a hole in your heart, just fill it with another circle, if it was a circle shape. One pain is lessened by another's anguish. Turn giddy and be hot by backward turning. One desperate grief cures with another's languish. Take thou some new infection to the eye, and the rank poison of the old will die, right? Again, if you find another girl, that happiness is going to replace the sadness that you have. Her beauty will replace the memory of the beauty that you swear you can never forget. And Romeo says, well, your planting leaf is excellent for that, right? The rank poison. And he says, for what, I pray thee, for your broken shin? Why, Romeo, art thou mad? Right? So Romeo's kind of sticking it into him. He's not happy with what Benvolio was telling him. And so Benvolio says, art thou mad? Are you upset? And Romeo says, not mad, but bound more than a madman is. Shut up in a prison, kept without my food, whipped and tormented, and good den, good fellow. Right? So they stumble upon the servant. And the servant says, God gie good den, I pray, sir, can you read? And being the smart aleck teenager, instead of just answering him yes, straightforward, he has to go the long way. And so Romeo says, I, mine own fortune in my misery, right? I can read that. And the servant says, oh, perhaps you have learned it without book, but I pray, can you read anything you see? And Romeo says, if I know the letters and the language. I mean, again, he's such a saucy little knave. And the servant says, ye say honestly, rest ye merry, right? And so he figures that this guy doesn't know how to read, so I'm not going to waste his time. I'm going to keep going. So Romeo realizes, okay, the joke is going over his head, right? And so he's going to reach out and grab the guy, and he tells him, stay, fellow, I can read. And so he takes the letter and he starts reading it. And again, it's just a list of all the people who were invited at this party, same day as Act 1, Scene 1, Saturday night. So first we have Signor Martino and his wife and daughters, County Anselmo and his beauteous sisters, the lady widow of Vitruvio, Signor Placentio and his lovely nieces, Mercutio and his brother Valentine, mine uncle Capulet, his wife and daughters, my fair niece Rosaline and Livia, Signor Valentio and his cousin Tybalt, Lucio and the lively Helena. And he gives him the paper back. Now did you catch that name that was on the list? My fair niece Rosaline. And that's the girl that he's crazy about. And so he says to the servant, a fair assembly, whither should they come, right? Where are they going? And the servant says, up. And Romeo says, where? Whither? To supper, to our house. And so Romeo's like, yes, whose house? And the servant says, my master's. And Romeo, kind of seeing that this guy is not the brightest, recognizes, indeed, I should have asked you that before, right? I should be more specific in when I'm talking to you because obviously you are not the brightest bulb in the box. And the servant says, well, now I'll tell you without asking. My master is the great rich Capulet, and if you be not of the house of Montagues, excellent dramatic irony because we know both of them are from the house of Montagues, I pray come and crush a cup of wine. Rest you merry. And he leaves. So Benvolio says, at this same ancient feast of Capulet sups the fair Rosaline whom thou so lovest, with all the admired beauties of Verona. Go thither, and with unattainted eye compare her face with some that I shall show, and I will make thee think thy swan a crow. Right? So let's crash this party. All the sweet babes from Verona are going to be there, and I will prove to you that the girl you think is the most beautiful is actually just a crow. And Romeo, very, very persistent that his love, Rosaline, is the best, says skeptically, when the devout religion of mine eye maintains such falsehood, then turn tears to fires, and these, who often drowned could never die, transparent heretics be burnt for liars. One fairer than my love? The all-seeing sun never saw her match since first the world begun. It's such a beautiful line with such a bold statement. The sun has been around since the earth has been spinning. And to say that the sun has never looked upon a woman more beautiful in all the history, not even Helen of Troy. That's something pretty amazing. Which, again, you kind of have to laugh at it because we know where this is going. We know what happens, and all these beautiful words, all this paint on canvas, all for naught. So Benvolio says, tut, you saw her fair, none else being by, right? The only reason you think she's beautiful is because there was nobody next to her to compare her to. Herself poised with herself in either eye, but in that crystal scales let there be weighed your lady's love against some other maid that I will show you shining at this feast, and she shall scant show well that now shows best. All right, and so again, he's very convinced. Yeah, he's going to find somebody for Romeo that's better for Rosaline. Which, you would think with all of this foreshadowing that it would have led up to Benvolio being the one to point out Juliet, but that actually doesn't happen. We'll see that soon enough. So Romeo again, committed to Rosaline, says, I'll go along, no such sight to be shown, right? I don't believe that you will find a girl that's better than her, but to rejoice in splendor of mine own, right? So I'm going to go and look at Rosaline. That's where I'm going to go to crash the party. Whether you find a girl that you think is prettier than her or not, that's to be determined. And so exeunt, right? Again, both of them exiting from the stage. And that, my friends, is Act 1, Scene 2. All right, but we're going to go through the rest of Act 1 since the scenes here are rather quick. All right, so think about it now. We've established the background that there's a feud happening in Verona. We've established in the background that the prince and the citizens are upset about all these fights. And so the new decree is anyone who fights is going to die. Foreshadowing, because why even say that if that's not going to apply later? Then we learn about Romeo and how sick he is and lovesick, and how he doesn't think he will ever fall in love again because this girl is totally giving him the cold shoulder. So this is Scene 3 now. What would you expect we will be talking about? Well, we've had enough of Montagues. Let's get into the Capulets. Let's meet Juliet, shall we? So Act 1, Scene 3, in the Capulet house, enter Lady Capulet with the nurse. Lady Capulet says, "Nurse, where's my daughter? Call her forth to me." And the nurse says, "Now by my maidenhead at 12-year-old, I bade her come." Which, I mean, that's a little TMI, right? You lost your virginity at 12. That's odd for you to say, but I guess that was usual back then. And so she starts calling, "What lamb? What ladybird? God forbid, where's this girl? What Juliet?" And so Juliet, after hearing everybody calling for her, finally shows up, enters the scene, and says, "How now? Who calls?" "Your mother." "Madam, I am here. What is your will?" And Lady Capulet says, "This is the matter. Nurse, give me leave a while. We must talk in secret." "Nurse, come back again. I have remembered me. Thou hearest our counsel. Thou knowest my daughters of a pretty age." Now, there's something to be noticed in these lines that she says, because without the movies, and I'm so happy that these movies have been made to kind of put things into context, because she jumps from one thing to another, right? Lady Capulet says, "Nurse, leave the room and give us privacy." And then she says, "Nurse, come back." Now, again, I really like the way they do it in the Leonardo DiCaprio version, because you can see the awkwardness that the mother feels when she's left alone, because she's not really the one raising her daughter. And I mean, the way she talks to her daughter, throughout the play, and I'll highlight some examples even in this scene alone, she's always at an arm's distance, which perhaps is because she was in a loveless marriage. Right? I mean, again, think about the disrespect she gave to Lord Capulet when he asked for a long sword and she said, "You should have a crutch because you're an old guy." Right? And so not really crazy about her own daughter too. And you can kind of tell that from there too. And so when she's left alone with her daughter, she realizes, oh crap, I've never spent any personal time with this kid. I don't know who she is. Don't leave me alone with her. And so she turns around and pulls the nurse back and says, "Oh yeah, I remember, that you hear what we say to each other." But that's garbage. It's just she doesn't want to be left alone with her because she feels awkward being left alone with a child that, I mean, yeah, she might have given birth to, but she didn't really raise, which we'll learn about in a moment. So the nurse, being the actual mother of Juliet in regards to raising and rearing and even breastfeeding her as an infant, she knows everything about Juliet. Unlike the mother who, makes estimations about her age, the nurse can tell you to an hour. And she even says, "Faith, I can tell her age unto an hour." And Lady Capulet says, "Well, she's not 14. And the nurse says, "I'll lay 14 of my teeth, and yet to my teen it be spoken, I have but 4, she's not 14. How long is it now to Lamestide? A fortnight and not days. Even Arad, of all days in the year, come Lammas Eve at night shall she be 14. Which unfortunately, as we know, she never makes it to that. Because the play takes place in 5 days. And a fortnight and not days, that's over 2 weeks. And so she knows exactly when in the year her birthday is. Where Lady Capulet's like, well, I mean, she's not, 14 yet. Right? I don't think. And so she continues on and says, Susan and she, right? So we learned here that Susan was the nurse's daughter, and she was born at the same time that Juliet was, but she died. And so in a parentheses, it says, God rest all Christian souls. Susan and she were of an age. Well, Susan is with God. She was too good for me. But as I said, on Lammas Eve at night shall she be 14. That shall she marry. I remember it well. 'Tis since the earthquake, now 11 years, and she was weaned, I never shall forget it, of all the days of the year, upon that day. For I had then laid wormwood to my dug, sitting in the sun under the dove-house wall. My lord and you were then at Mantua, nay, I do bear a brain, but as I said, when it did taste the wormwood on the nipple of my dug, and felt it bitter, pretty fool, to see it tetchy and fall out with the dug. Shake, quoth the dove-house, 'twas no need, I trow, to bid me trudge. And since that time it is 11 years, for then she could stand alone. Nay, by the rod, she could have run and waddled all about, for even the day before she broke her bow. And then my husband, God be with his soul, Ah, was a merry man, took up the child. Yea, quoth he, dost thou fall upon thy face? Thou wilt fall backwards when thou hast more wit, wilt thou not, Jule? And by my holidam, the pretty wretch left crying, and said I, to see now how a jest shall come about, I warrant, and I should live 1,000 years, I should never forget it. Wilt thou not, Julie, quoth he, and pretty fool it stinted, and said I. All right, so let's break down all that stuff, because the nurse is known to ramble here, as you've seen. And so the major points that you should get there is, again, that she had a daughter when Juliet was born, and that's important because she then became the wet nurse, right? Again, Lady Capulet, I don't really think was involved in this relationship too much, not even wanting to be a mother, maybe resentful that she was made a mother at so young. Maybe that's what Lord Capulet, was saying, speaking from experience, that if you marry them too young, you mar them, and then it's no good. And then they're just bitter all the time. But anyway, so she doesn't want to be involved in it. Gravity's already going to take its toll. If you add children onto it, it's just going to make the work go by a little bit faster. And so I guess to preserve her body, to preserve her youth and her sexuality, right, it would be easier than to get somebody else to have to go through all of those consequences breastfeeding the child. And so because she was lactating, since she was preparing to, deal with a child of her own, she had then milk for Juliet to take. And again, I don't know, maybe Lady Capulet, didn't have enough milk. I'm not trying to make a judgment or anything here, because there's not really enough information really to go. But these are different things that I think about, different, let's say, perspectives. Why not? And so again, she reminds us that she knows her age. She talks about an experience when they went to Mantua, which is kind of foreshadowing Mantua, which is going to be a secondary setting in the scene later in Acts 4 and 5. That they were, I guess, on holiday, taking vacation, and apparently her husband was still alive at this time. Probably worked for the Capulets as well. As I think was typical, that families would work for the same family. And so Juliet fell down and she fell forward, right, and fell on her face, and she was hurt. And the husband picks her up and, tells her basically, when you're smarter, Juliet, you're going to learn how to fall on your butt, right, instead of your face. And Juliet, cried and said, yeah, I will. And for some reason, the nurse thinks that's hilarious, right? She thinks it's hilarious that she got this big knock on her head. And she thinks it's hilarious that her husband, was a little vulgar talking about her butt. And Juliet, being young and naive, just, responding like, yeah, I'll fall on my butt next time instead of falling on my face. And so you have to imagine that the nurse is cracking up here, right? She is the funny character in the play. She's the one that lightens up the mood. And so Lady Capulet is sick of it, right? She's been talking way too much, and she says, enough of this. I pray thee, hold thy peace. But the nurse can't control herself. And so she says, yes, madam. Yet I cannot choose but laugh to think it should leave crying and say aye. And yet I warrant it had upon its brow a bump as big as a young cockerel stone, a perilous knock, and it cried bitterly. Yea, quoth my husband, fallest upon thy face. Thou wilt fall backward when thou comest to an age. Wilt thou not, Juliet? Stinted and said I, right? Just cracking up. And even Juliet now is getting annoyed by, this long story. And so she says, and stint thou too. I pray thee, nurse, say I. And so the nurse finally gets it and says, peace, I have done. God mark thee to his grace. Thou wast the prettiest babe that ever I nursed, and I might live to see thee married once. I have my wish. Right? And so that idea of marriage is exactly what Lady Capulet wanted to talk to Juliet about. So she says, Mary, that Mary is the very thing I came to talk of. Tell me, daughter Juliet, how stands your disposition to be married? Now, call me crazy, but calling your child daughter Juliet kind of seems like a stiff arm to me, like she's running in for a hug and it's kind of slow motion, kind of stiff arm, the head, the neck goes back and everything. It's like, holy cow, daughter Juliet, like you can't just call me daughter. You can't just say Juliet, right? You got to give the stiff arm daughter Juliet, which again, I think not very close, not very intimate. And so what is Juliet's response? Has she ever thought of marriage? Well, she's 13. So she says, it is an honor that I dream not of, right? I've never dreamt of it, never really thought about it. I'm a kid playing with toys probably still, right? The nurse says, in honor, were not I thine only nurse, I would say that thou hast sucked wisdom from thy teat, right? And so again, always vulgar, so classy, the nurse. But isn't that how it is, right? I mean, usually those who are not so financially secure are rich in colorful words, let's say. So Lady Capulet responds, well, think of marriage now. Younger than you, here in Verona, ladies of esteem are made already mothers, right? And so kind of like Paris, kind of trying to push her out of the home, right? So think about it now. By my count, I was your mother much upon these years that you are now a maid, right? And so again, Lady Capulet's kind of admitting that, I was forced at a young age to have to bear you as my child. And I mean, think about that, to ask a 12 or 13-year-old to carry your baby. I mean, that sounds kind of crazy. I mean, maybe the teachers union would think that's normal nowadays because, we're at a really crazy time here in America, but I don't think that's right. And so maybe that made her a little bitter and cynical, you ruined my body before it was even prime, before it was even peaked. And thrust me into this responsibility where I was still playing with toys and now I have to take care of a living, breathing child. But going back, she says, thus then in brief, right? Always so quick, always so curt with her child. The valiant Paris seeks you for his love. And so you can tell that between scene 2 and scene 3 that Lord Capulet has imparted to Lady Capulet that Paris is insistent upon marrying her. And so find out, how does she feel about him? And the nurse gets very excited because Paris is a good guy. Although he's going to appear antagonistic in the play just because of his relationship with the protagonist, Romeo, he really is a nice kid. He's just caught in the middle of this thing that, he's just trying to do right by the traditions of the time. If she loves me, that'd be great, but, I just want her, so I'm going to make deals with the dad to get her, and maybe she'll learn to love me, and, that's crazy, but, that's how things were. And so the nurse very excited about this idea that Paris would be interested in Juliet because he is such a good guy. Says, a man, young lady, such a man is all the world. Why, he is a man of wax. Right, that he's so perfect they make wax statues off of him. And Lady Capulet responds, Verona's summer hath not such a flower, right? Basically they have deemed him the most beautiful of all the gentlemen. Nay, he is a flower in faith, a very flower, says the nurse. So Lady Capulet persists. What say you? Can you love the gentleman? This night you shall behold him at our feast. Read over the volume of young Paris's face, and find delight writ there with beauty's pen. Examine every several lineament. Right? And so she wants Juliet to, look at him. See if you like him. Look at his arms, look at his legs, look at other parts. And she says, see how one another lends content, and what obscured in this fair volume lies, find written in the margent of his eyes. This precious book of love, this unbound lover, to beautify him only lacks a cover, which again reveals the woman's role in this time. The man is the story, and the woman is the cover that makes the story beautiful. And so she's even admitting the only thing he lacks is arm candy. You should be his arm candy. The fish lives in the sea, and 'tis much pride for fair without the fair within to hide. That book in many's eyes doth share the glory that in gold class locks in the golden story. Right? He's a beautiful future. He's a fine young man. Others desire and want him. So shall you share all that he doth possess by having him, making yourself no less. Right? And so you get half his wealth when you marry him too, honey. Don't forget about that. And the nurse, again, always in the gutter, has to make a joke and say no less. Nay, bigger. Women grow by men. Right? We make girls pregnant and they get bigger. So Lady Capulet again, speak briefly. Always in a rush. Can you like of Paris's love? And Juliet, I think here, very smartly answers back. I'll look to like, if looking liking move. But no more deep shall I dart mine eye than your consent gives strength to make it fly. Right? So, I'll look at him And if I can like a person just by looking at him, I mean, I guess, sure, but, and then the suck up part to her mother. But I will not indart mine eye on him until you give me consent. Right? And so kind of sucking up to her mom, like, I'll fall in love with the man that you want me to fall in love with. But a serving man unfortunately interrupts this intimate mood and says, Madam, the guests are come. Supper served up. You called, my young lady asked for, the nurse cursed in the pantry, and everything in extremity. I must hence to wait. I beseech you, follow straight. Right? And so he's telling them the party started. Things are getting out of control. We need your female touch. And she says, we follow thee. And last time to Juliet, looking over her shoulder, Juliet, the county stays. Right? I mean, that's how she ends it. He's waiting for you, so hurry up. The nurse, however, and again, in the Leonardo DiCaprio version, I think does a wonderful job. Although the original version, too, does a nice job, too, where the nurse goes to Juliet like a mother should before a party that, you know, has so much prospect. Go, girl. Seek happy nights to happy days. Right? That's what a mother should tell her daughter before a party. Go have fun. Be young. Be free. End of scene 3. Scene 4 is in a street near the Capulet house. And so remember, the boys have decided that they're going to crash this party. And so because of the nature of this scene, I know I told you we were going to rip right through Act 1, but my lovelies, we cannot rush through Scene 4 or 5. So we're going to do them together next week. They are long, not as long as Scene 1, and we will certainly do them together to close out Act 1. But to do it today and to rush through it, since it is Valentine's Day, and I don't want to spend too much time in front of the computer away from my family, we're going to call adieu in regards to the story, but next week we will get into some pretty fascinating scenes. We are introduced to one of my favorite characters, Mercutio, who gives a really interesting monologue that, I mean, again, the Leonardo DiCaprio version is incredible. If you want to see it, YouTube just that scene, you know, type in Mercutio monologue and you'll find it, or Google Queen Mab speech. And you'll get a bunch of different actors who have kind of posted their videos. It's neat, but I promise you, the guy from the Leonardo DiCaprio movie that plays Mercutio knocks it out of the ballpark. I mean, it is so good. Although, you know, to be honest, too, the original was also really, really well done. That guy really brought to life a lot of stuff. And I'm going to talk about that next week, too, where, you know, the way each actor does it kind of gives you different perspectives, I guess, about the character. And so I'm going to talk about both of them because both of them, I think, add a lot of complexity to the character. And unfortunately, you know, his existence in the play is short-lived, but he is such a rich and such a wonderful character that we're going to do that. And we're going to dedicate those scenes to those characters then in next week. So if you would, have a wonderful Valentine's Day. God bless you all. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. If you want to be a Patreon and get some really cool merch, go to patreon.com and check out the Pasho Perspective. Until then, I'll talk to you later. Have a great week. Bye-bye.